The look on my daughter's face when I slid the Swiss bank statement across the table was worth every humiliating day I spent in that nursing home. "But Mom," she stammered, "how could you possibly have $5 million? That's when I knew I had her. The same daughter who'd convinced my own grandchildren I was mentally incompetent just to sell my house out from under me. 30 years in the diplomatic service had taught me to always have a contingency plan. She just never bothered to ask what mine was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. At 75, I've survived 3 decades of international diplomacy, 2 marriages, and 1 betrayal that cut deeper than any political crisis ever could. For nearly 30 years, I served in the United States Foreign Service, representing American interests in embassies across 5 continents. My missions took me to countries during military coups, through economic collapses, and into negotiations that never made the evening news. I carried diplomatic pouches with documents that altered international relations and performed duties that earned me commendations I rarely display. When I finally retired as a senior Foreign Service officer, I thought I'd left danger and deception behind me. My late husband, Robert, who stood by me through 22 relocations and countless anxious nights waiting for news of my safety in troubled regions, always emphasized one thing. Ellie, never let anyone, not even family, know everything you have. Keep something in reserve. I dismissed his caution back then as unnecessary paranoia, a holdover from our years living under diplomatic security protocols. After all, what kind of daughter would see her aging mother as nothing more than a financial opportunity? I'd soon learn the answer to that question. My retirement brought a modest government pension of $3,800 monthly, comfortable enough in our small coastal town of Harborview. The town suited me, population 12,000, mostly working folks, retirees and artists who valued privacy and simple pleasures. My needs were straightforward: maintaining my half-acre property where I grew prized roses that were the envy of the local garden club, attending my book group every Tuesday at the community center, and spending weekends with my daughter Rebecca's family when they visited from the city. My grandson Tyler had just turned 17, a bright young man with dreams of Georgetown's School of Foreign Service and a respect for international relations that warmed this old diplomat's heart. His sister Kayla, 14, had Robert's musical talent and my stubborn determination. Those kids were my world, the future I'd fought to protect throughout my Foreign Service career. My 3-bedroom Cape Cod house on Ocean View Drive wasn't luxurious, but it was paid off and filled with 40 years of memories. The study where I taught Tyler conversational French, the grand piano where Robert and I had spent countless evenings planning our future, the sunroom where I'd watched hundreds of sunsets after he passed from heart failure 5 years ago. Every corner held pieces of my history. "Mom, I worry about you all alone in that big house," Rebecca started saying around my 73rd birthday. At first, I thought nothing of it. Daughters worry, and I'd worried about my own mother once upon a time. But then came the suggestions that seemed oddly persistent. "Mom, did you forget to take your blood pressure medication again?" she'd ask, though my pill organizer clearly showed I hadn't missed a dose. "Mom, did you leave the stove on overnight?" Mrs. Peterson next door called me concerned, but when I later thanked Mrs. Peterson for her vigilance, she seemed genuinely confused about making any such call. "Mom, have you noticed you're getting more forgetful lately?" Rebecca would say. Though my mind remained sharp as ever, I still completed the New York Times crossword puzzle daily, in pen. Little instances, carefully crafted and sprinkled through our conversations like tactical disinformation, something I recognized from my diplomatic days. Small, undermining comments designed to instill doubt, both in me and about me. I couldn't understand why until I overheard Rebecca on the phone one evening, while she thought I was napping in my sunroom after dinner during one of her visits. "The property values in Harborview are skyrocketing," she whispered urgently to someone. If we wait much longer, we'll miss the market peak. Dr. Winters already agreed to write the cognitive assessment we need. I found the perfect facility. Whispering. Pines, it's basic but clean. The best part is, Medicare covers most of it, which means we can use her pension to finish the renovations on the house before we sell. The real estate agent thinks we could get at least $450,000 in this market. My teacup nearly slipped from my fingers. My daughter, my only child whom I'd read international fairy tales to and stayed up with during childhood fevers, whose Ivy League education I'd funded entirely, was plotting to have me declared incompetent, institutionalized, and my home liquidated for her benefit. That night, I stared at the ceiling, remembering Robert's warnings. How had he known? The real betrayal wasn't just Rebecca's plan. It was realizing I'd failed to see her clearly for perhaps my entire life. I didn't confront her. Years of diplomatic negotiations had taught me that sometimes the most powerful response comes when you allow your opponent to believe their plan is succeeding. Besides, I had preparations of my own to make. The international diplomatic community had given me connections most people could never imagine, contacts at banks that valued discretion above all, relationships with legal experts who specialized in complex asset protection, friends in positions of authority who owed me favors I'd never called in. Until now. For the next 3 weeks, I made careful phone calls when Rebecca wasn't around. I sent encrypted emails from the public library computer. I transferred documents to a safety deposit box Rebecca knew nothing about. All the while, I maintained a perfect facade of gentle confusion, just enough to reinforce her narrative without raising suspicions about my awareness. I monitored her movements carefully. She was spending more time with her tennis partner's husband, Dr. Winters, a neurologist who'd recently opened a specialized elder care assessment practice. I noted the increased frequency of real estate agents just happening to drive by my home. I observed Rebecca taking photos of my rooms when she thought I wasn't looking. The precision of her planning would have been admirable if it weren't so heartbreaking. In another life, she might have made an excellent diplomat herself. Patient, strategic, calculating. Instead, she was using those talents to orchestrate my removal from my own life. My foreign service career has taught me to recognize patterns, to read intentions behind carefully constructed facades. My daughter's behavior displayed all the classic signs of someone convinced their underhanded actions were justified by a greater purpose. In this case, her financial gain disguised as concern for my welfare. I understood now why Robert had been so insistent about our financial arrangements after his diagnosis. He'd seen something in Rebecca I had refused to acknowledge, a materialism that had gradually evolved into something darker. Perhaps he'd recognized it because he carried similar tendencies in his younger years, tendencies he'd overcome through our years together in service. Before his death, Robert had helped me establish several overseas accounts, including the substantial one in Switzerland that Rebecca knew nothing about. For emergencies, he'd said, for when diplomacy fails. I'd indulged him then, seeing it as an unnecessary precaution. Now I recognized it for what it was, a lifeline he'd prepared for me, knowing I might one day need it. As I prepared for what was to come, I felt strangely calm. The years I'd spent navigating delicate international situations had prepared me for this most personal of betrayals. I knew how to appear vulnerable while maintaining inner strength, how to concede small battles to win the larger war, and how to wait for precisely the right moment to reveal my position. My daughter had made a critical error in her calculations. She saw my age as weakness, my kindness as naivety, my diplomatic restraint as passivity. She had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, that I had spent my life negotiating with people who had much more to lose and much more power than she could ever imagine. I would allow her plan to unfold. I would enter the nursing home. I would sign her documents. I would appear to surrender my autonomy. And then, when all the pieces were in place, I would show her that the diplomatic skills I'd honed across decades hadn't diminished with retirement. This would be my final negotiation, not for peace between nations, but for justice and restoration of my own dignity. Within 3 weeks, Rebecca arrived with Dr. Winters, her tennis partner's husband, as I later discovered, who subjected me to a battery of questions designed to expose cognitive decline. I noticed how he recorded my occasional pauses but ignored my perfect recall of dates and details. The assessment was as fair as a rigged election I'd once monitored in Southeast Asia. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm concerned about your cognitive function," he pronounced gravely after our brief session. "For your safety, I recommend assisted living with full-time supervision." Rebecca dabbed at tears that never reached her eyes. 2 days later, Rebecca and her husband Mark helped me pack just the essentials. Family photos were deemed too fragile for my new accommodations. My diplomatic medals and certificates were safer in Rebecca's keeping. Even my gardening tools were unnecessary clutter. I watched them dismantle my life with surgical precision, taking only what I had carefully planned to bring. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The movers Rebecca hired were efficient, transforming 40 years into 3 cardboard boxes in under 2 hours. Whispering Pines was nothing like its brochure. The ocean views were visible only from the administrator's office. The extensive grounds consisted of a small courtyard with a few plastic chairs. My private suite was a 180-square-foot room with institutional beige walls shared with a roommate who shouted at the television. "It's just temporary, Mom," Rebecca promised, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just until we get the house ready to sell. Then we'll find somewhere nicer." I smiled, patted her hand, and said what she needed to hear. "I understand, dear. You know what's best." As Rebecca and Mark hurried away, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out the one thing I'd insisted on bringing my battered leather, a dress book. Inside, where Rebecca had never bothered to look, was a safety deposit box key and a business card for Rothstein & Associates, attorneys at law. When the door closed behind my daughter, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the address book to the notes section and added another tally mark under days until Operation Sunrise. 90. The nursing home routine was designed to infantilize wake-up calls at 5:30 a.m., medications distributed whether needed or not, meals that tasted of nothing served on plastic trays, activities consisting of bingo and creating construction paper crafts, as if decades of diplomatic discipline and cultural sophistication had evaporated upon admission. My roommate Gladys alternated between periods of genuine confusion and remarkable lucidity. During the latter, she revealed herself as a retired literature professor with a wickedly dark sense of humor. "They think we're already dead," she whispered one night. "That's why they don't bother making the food taste like anything." I found allies in unexpected places. Nurse Sophia slipped me real coffee from the staff lounge. Orderly Jackson sneaked in international news magazines when he saw me finishing the facility's limited library in days. Janitor Elias had a cell, phone I could borrow during his breaks to make private calls. Rebecca visited every Sunday for exactly 45 minutes, leaving promptly before the cafeteria began serving dinner. She brought updates on the house. "The renovations are coming along beautifully. Tyler and Kayla are so busy with school activities they barely notice you're gone. And my former garden. We had to remove those old rose bushes, but the new landscaping looks much more modern." Each visit, she'd bring a document requiring my signature medical releases, insurance forms, permission to access accounts. I signed them all with the docile compliance she expected, watching her tuck them away with poorly concealed triumph. "How long until the house is sold?" I asked on her 8th visit. "Oh, the market's a bit slower than expected," she hedged. "But we've got an interested buyer. Another few weeks, maybe." What Rebecca didn't know, what she'd never bothered to discover, was that every Thursday for the past 15 years, I'd taken the bus downtown claiming to attend my book group. In reality, I met with my financial advisor, Samuel Rothstein, son of a fellow diplomat who'd helped evacuate my team during a coup in West Africa, a mission that still doesn't appear in any official State Department history. 1 month into my nursing home stay, Samuel visited me, posing as my nephew. We sat in the facility's courtyard, far from prying ears. "It's all proceeding as you requested, Eleanor," he confirmed. "The funds transfer from the Zurich account to the Grand Cayman Holding Company completed last week. The counter-purchase of your daughter's mortgage has been executed through our shell corporation. She has no idea?" "None. The notification letters will go out exactly when specified." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and heartbreak. "And the other arrangements?" "Your new apartment at the Jefferson is ready whenever you are. The trust for Tyler and Kayla's education is ironclad. Rebecca cannot touch it, even if she discovers its existence." I watched a sparrow building a nest in the courtyard's single scraggly tree. Even here, life continued, adapted, found purpose. "Days," I said softly. "Not a day sooner or later." Samuel's expression softened with concern. "Eleanor, I've known you since I was a child. I've watched you navigate political minefields and international crises. But having to endure this place, this indignity, are you sure you want to wait that long?" I smiled at the younger man's impatience. "Samuel, diplomatic negotiations are about timing. Move too soon, and your position is weakened. Move too late, and opportunities vanish. 90 days gives Rebecca enough rope to fully reveal her intentions, enough time for the necessary legal documentation, and enough patience to ensure that when I act, my victory will be absolute." He nodded reluctantly. "You were always my father's most strategic colleague." "How is Ambassador Rothstein?" I asked, grateful for this connection to my former life. "Still lecturing at Georgetown, still telling stories about that evacuation in Abidjan, where you outmaneuvered the rebel forces." Samuel's expression grew serious. "He sends his regards and says to remind you of what he always taught the junior officers. When diplomacy fails, make sure you're the one holding the better cards." I laughed softly, remembering the phrase. "Your father always had a way with words, and in this case, I'm holding the royal flush." When Samuel left, I returned to my room to find Gladys arranging. Her collection of classic literature paperbacks on the windowsill tattered copies of Austen and Dickens, her most prized possessions. "Your nephew seems nice," she commented without looking up from her books. "Very respectful." "Yes, he comes from a good diplomatic family." "Planning something, aren't you?" Gladys observed, her roomy eyes suddenly sharp. I recognized the look. Had it myself once, before I realized my son had emptied my accounts and it was too late. I studied with my roommate with newfound interest. "What happened?" "What always happens," she sighed. "By the time I discovered what Charles had done, the money was gone. My retirement, the proceeds from selling my home, everything. The police said it was a family matter. The bank said I'd signed the authorizations." Her bitter laugh held decades of regret. "Now I'm here until I die, while Charles enjoys early retirement in Phoenix with my life's savings." I reached across to squeeze her hand. "I'm sorry, Gladys." She fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Don't be sorry for me. Just tell me you've got a better plan than I did." "I do," I assured her. "Good." Her smile revealed stained dentures. "Then I want front row seats when it happens." That night, I added Gladys to my list of allies. Days at Whispering Pines blurred together by design. The monotony was a form of control without variation, without stimulation. The mind gradually surrenders to apathy. I fought against it by creating secret routines. I recited diplomatic protocols and foreign language vocabulary during morning medications. I mentally drafted policy briefs during afternoon crafts. I planned cultural exchange programs during the blaring evening television programs. Rebecca's visits became less frequent. Every other Sunday, then once a month, her excuses grew more elaborate. Tyler had debate tournaments. Mark had work commitments. The house renovations required supervision. On her 5th month of absence, she arrived with a thick envelope. "Just some final paperwork for the house sale," she explained breezily. "The buyers are eager to close." I noticed she wore new designer clothes and had the polished look of someone who'd recently visited an expensive spa. My pension checks, which should have been accumulating for my care beyond what Medicare covered, had clearly found another purpose. "All these forms," I sighed, playing my role. "What exactly am I signing?" "Just standard closing documents, Mom," she said impatiently. "The buyers need confirmation you're transferring all rights to the property." I pretended to squint at the papers. "My eyes aren't what they used to be. Could you summarize each one before I sign?" Rebecca's irritation flashed briefly before her practiced smile returned. "Of course, Mom. This first one is just acknowledging the sale price of $480,000. The house was worth at least $650,000 in the current market. I wondered if the difference was disappearing into my daughter's pocket, or if she'd found a straw buyer who would flip the property immediately. I signed every document with careful penmanship, nothing like the shaky hand Rebecca had come to expect. She was too focused on the signatures to notice. "When will I see my portion of the sale?" I asked innocently. Rebecca's smile tightened. "Well, Mom, after paying off the remaining mortgage, the home equity loan we took for your medical expenses, and setting aside funds for your..." As she gathered the signed documents, I asked, "How are things at the new condo? Lakefront Towers, right? Tyler mentioned it when he called." Tyler hadn't called. He hadn't been permitted to. Rebecca froze momentarily. "It's wonderful. The perfect location, and the investment potential is excellent. Smart move," I nodded. "Property is always a good investment." She left with promises to visit again soon. Promises we both knew were empty. That night, I updated my address book. Days until Operation Sunrise. 5. The final pieces fell into place, with precision that would have made my old diplomatic security team proud. Samuel confirmed that Rebecca and Mark had closed on my house, depositing the full amount into their personal accounts rather than any trust for my care. They had also missed their first mortgage payment on their luxury condo at Lakefront Towers, sending a letter contesting the new ownership notification as obviously fraudulent. Gladys helped me dress for my departure day, despite her periodic confusion. Her fingers were steady as she fastened my pearl necklace, not the costume ones Rebecca had left me, but my real pearls that Nurse Sophia had retrieved from my safety deposit box. "You look like yourself again," Gladys declared, stepping back to admire the transformation. Gone was the shapeless facility-issued attire. In its place, a tailored suit, modest heels, and a light application of the makeup I'd always favored. My silver hair, usually left uncombed by the rushed aides, was neatly styled. I looked like what I was, a retired senior foreign service officer, not an institutional afterthought. "Will you be all right here without me?" I asked Gladys, genuine concern tempering my excitement. She patted my hand. "Don't you worry about old Gladys. Your lawyer friend already explained everything. I'll be joining you at that fancy new place next week." I kissed her papery cheek, front row seats as promised. Samuel arrived precisely at noon, bringing with him Dr. Claudia Ramirez, a geriatric specialist with no connection to Rebecca's social circle. After a thorough cognitive assessment, she signed the papers declaring me fully competent to manage my own affairs. "Not that there was ever any doubt," Dr. Ramirez smiled, "but now we have documentation to counter the previous assessment." As Samuel escorted me to his waiting car, several residents watched from windows. Nurse Sophia hugged me fiercely. "Give them hell," she whispered. The law offices of Rothstein and Associates occupied the 17th floor of a downtown building with views of the bay. Rebecca and Mark arrived 10 minutes late, clearly annoyed by the summons from an unknown attorney. Their irritation turned to shock when they saw me seated at the conference table, looking nothing like the docile nursing home resident they'd abandoned. "Mom?" Rebecca's voice rose an octave. "What's going on? Why aren't you at Whispering Pines?" Before I could answer, Tyler slipped through the door, his lanky teenage frame filling the doorway. My heart leapt at the sight of my grandson, taller than when I'd last seen him, but with the same intelligent eyes. "Grandma!" He rushed toward me, engulfing me in a hug that smelled of teenage aftershave and hope. "What is he doing here?" Rebecca demanded. "He has debate practice." "I invited him," I replied calmly. "He deserves to hear this too." Mark, always quick to calculate angles, assessed my appearance in the formal setting. "Eleanor, if this is about the house sale, everything was completely legal. You signed all the documents voluntarily." Attorney Catherine Zhao, a silver-haired woman with the precise movements of a chess master, entered and took her position at the head of the table. "Shall we begin? I believe we have much to discuss regarding property ownership, financial management, and perhaps most importantly, medical ethics." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "I don't understand what this is about." I met my daughter's eyes. Directly. "It's about consequences, Rebecca." Catherine opened a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Mitchell has asked me to address several matters. First, the sale of the property at 1478 Ocean View Drive. While Mrs. Mitchell did indeed sign the transfer documents, she did so under documented duress following a fraudulent medical assessment." "That's ridiculous," Rebecca sputtered. "Dr. Winters is a respected physician who has agreed to surrender his license rather than face a formal investigation into multiple questionable competency evaluations," Catherine finished smoothly. "We have his signed affidavit admitting he never conducted standard cognitive testing protocols." Mark's face darkened. "This is absurd. Eleanor clearly needed assistance." "The second matter," Catherine continued as if he hadn't spoken, "concerns the management of Mrs. Mitchell's pension and financial assets during her unnecessary confinement." She slid financial statements across the table. Bank transfers, renovation invoices paid directly from my accounts, jewelry appraisals. "Mom gave us permission to handle her finances," Rebecca insisted, though her voice had lost its certainty. "Curious that these expenses include a 3-week vacation to Switzerland and a new vehicle registered solely in your names," Catherine observed, "neither of which constitute management of assets for Mrs. Mitchell's benefit." Tyler looked between his parents and me, confusion and dawning comprehension battling across his expressive face. "The final matter," I said, taking over, "concerns your current residence." I removed a document from my handbag and slid it across the table. The mortgage transfer to North Star Holdings, LLC. Rebecca stared at it uncomprehendingly. "What is this?" "Evidence that your current condominium mortgage has been purchased by North Star Holdings," I explained, "a corporation I established 20 years ago." Mark grabbed the document, scanning it frantically. "This can't be legal." "You bought your condo from Lakefront Development Group, a subsidiary of North Star Holdings," Samuel confirmed. "Mrs. Mitchell has effectively owned your mortgage since, before you expressed interest in purchasing a unit there." The silence that fell was absolute. Rebecca's carefully constructed reality was collapsing in real time, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and fear. "You've missed your first 2 mortgage payments," I continued quietly. "Technically, I could begin foreclosure proceedings immediately." "You wouldn't," Rebecca whispered. "We're family." "Family?" I repeated, tasting the word. "Is family someone who falsified medical reports to gain control of assets? Who isolates an elderly parent in a substandard facility while liquidating her possessions? Who lies to her children about their grandmother's mental state to prevent them from visiting? Tyler turned to his mother, shock evident. "You told me Grandma didn't recognize me anymore, that it would upset her if I visited." Rebecca couldn't meet his eyes. "I was trying to protect you from seeing her decline." "There was no decline," I said firmly. "Only your convenient fiction." Mark, ever pragmatic, leaned forward. "What do you want, Eleanor? To punish us? Take our home? Turn Tyler against us? Just tell us what will make this go away." I studied my son-in-law's face, handsome in a conventional way, but with a coldness I'd always attributed to reserve rather than calculation. How blind I'd been. "I don't want punishment," I said finally. "I want justice and protection, not just for myself, but for others." Catherine handed me another folder. I opened it and removed a bank statement, the Swiss account showing just over $5 million. This was the moment I'd planned for months, the culmination of my counterattack. I slid the statement across to Rebecca. "This is what your father and I built over decades of service. This is what you never knew about because neither of us trusted your growing materialism. This is what would have supported your children's education and perhaps even your retirement, if you had simply been patient and decent." Rebecca stared at the statement, mouth slightly open. "But Mom," she stammered, "how could you possibly have $5 million? The diplomatic mask I'd worn for months at Whispering Pines fell away. Robert and I served in some of the most dangerous postings in the Foreign Service. We lived frugally, invested carefully, and prepared for contingencies. That's what diplomats do. We prepare for every scenario, including betrayal." "Those pension checks you've been spending," Samuel added. "They're just a fraction of Mrs. Mitchell's actual income. The Swiss account generates approximately $250,000 annually in interest alone." "You went through all this," Mark gestured vaguely. "The nursing home, everything, when you had this kind of money?" "I needed to understand exactly what you were capable of," I explained. "I needed irrefutable evidence of your intentions. Most importantly, I needed to protect others from experiencing what I did." Catherine outlined my terms methodically. The house sale would be reversed with all proceeds returned. Rebecca and Mark would keep their condo, but under new mortgage terms that included hefty contributions to an elder care monitoring program I was establishing. They would complete mandatory community service at a seniors advocacy organization. Most importantly, I concluded, I want honesty going forward. No more manipulation, no more lies, and Tyler and Kayla visit me whenever they wish. My grandson reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it in silent support. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. How can we ever make this right? By remembering that aging doesn't equal incompetence. The meeting concluded with signatures and subdued promises. As we prepared to leave, Tyler pulled me aside. "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I didn't know." "It's not your burden," I assured him. "But perhaps there's a lesson here about seeing people clearly, even those closest to you." In the lobby, Rebecca attempted one last explanation. "We were worried about you, Mom. It started with good intentions." I studied my daughter's face, the same face I'd watched grow from infancy to womanhood. Perhaps. But good intentions pave notorious roads. Samuel was waiting with the car to take me to my new apartment at the Jefferson, a senior living community that respected its residents' independence and dignity. As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of Rebecca standing on the sidewalk, looking lost. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked gently. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." This wasn't a victory I'd celebrate. It was a necessary demonstration of boundaries, a painful lesson in consequences. In the diplomatic world, we call it a measured response, proportional to the offense but designed to prevent future transgressions. Not vengeance, but a clear message that actions have repercussions. As the car navigated through familiar streets toward my new home, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. The daughter I thought I knew was gone. But perhaps from these ashes of betrayal, something honest could eventually grow. Operation Sunrise complete, I whispered to myself. Just as the sun reveals what darkness conceals, my plan has illuminated a painful truth. Now came the harder part, deciding what kind of relationship, if any, might be salvaged from these ruins. 3 months later, my apartment at the Jefferson bloomed with transplanted roses rescued from my old garden. The balcony overlooking the bay provided the perfect southern exposure for my prized Damascus hybrids, which were thriving after their traumatic uprooting and replanting. Gladys occupied the apartment across the hall, just as I had promised. Her periods of confusion had diminished considerably in an environment that stimulated rather than sedated her mind. We hosted a weekly book club in the community room that quickly became a coveted invitation among the residents. The Jeffersons' administrator even asked me to consider serving on their resident advisory board. "You bring a certain diplomatic finesse to conflict resolution," she explained, after I'd successfully mediated a heated dispute over bridge tournament rules. I accepted, recognizing that my professional skills could benefit my new community. After decades abroad representing American interests, I found satisfaction in advocating for the dignity and voice of older citizens who were too often dismissed or marginalized. Tyler visited every Wednesday after school. His college application to Georgetown School of Foreign Service was progressing well, and I enjoyed helping him refine his essays about pursuing diplomatic work in conflict regions. Sometimes Kayla joined him, drawn to the art studio at the EA Jefferson, where a retired museum curator taught watercolor techniques. Rebecca's path toward redemption proved more complicated. The legal agreements had been finalized, the financial restitution arranged, the community service hours begun. But rebuilding trust is never as simple as signing documents or following court orders. Our relationship remained fragile, tentative, each interaction shaped by the shadow of her betrayal. I had reversed the house sale as planned, not because I intended to return to it, but because it represented a principle. The property had been taken through deception. Reclaiming it was about justice, not sentiment. I eventually listed it with a reputable agent who found a young family eager to make it their own. The proceeds went into a scholarship fund for aspiring Foreign Service officers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Rebecca and Mark maintained their condo under the revised mortgage terms. Among the requirements, monthly contributions to the Elder Dignity Project, a monitoring program I established with Catherine's legal assistance. The project employed trained advocates who conducted surprise inspections of nursing facilities, reviewed suspicious guardianship filings, and provided free legal assistance to vulnerable seniors. Nurse Sophia became the project's first full-time coordinator, bringing her insider knowledge of institutional care practices to our advocacy work. "Most abuse happens because no one's watching," she explained during our planning sessions. "We're going to change that equation." I used a portion of my Swiss funds to establish a fellowship at Georgetown for studying elder rights as a human rights issue. Ambassador Rothstein agreed to oversee the academic component, integrating it into the university's human rights curriculum. "A fitting legacy," he told me, "for a diplomat who always recognized that true security begins with protecting the vulnerable." One Tuesday afternoon, I returned from a meeting with the fellowship committee to find Rebecca waiting outside my apartment door. Her appearance had changed subtly. Gone were the designer clothes and status jewelry that had once seemed so essential to her identity. Her outfit was simple, her manner subdued. "I didn't want to bother you," she said when I approached. "I can. Come back another time." "No need," I replied, unlocking my door. "Come in." My apartment was modest by design, a deliberate contrast to the excessive consumption Rebecca had once valued. A comfortable living room with bookshelves filled with volumes on diplomacy and international affairs. A small study where I conducted my advocacy work. A kitchen where I prepared simple meals, often sharing them with Gladys or other residents. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, maintaining the formal politeness that had characterized our interactions since the confrontation at Samuel's office. Please, I prepared 2 cups of jasmine tea, a habit acquired during a posting in China decades earlier. As I set the delicate porcelain cups on the coffee table, Rebecca handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "The final restitution payment," she explained, "plus a donation to the Elder Dignity Project. I wanted to deliver it personally rather than through the attorneys." I nodded, accepting the envelope without examining its contents. We both knew the money was secondary to the principle involved. "How are the community service hours going?" I asked after a moment of silence. A flicker of something crossed Rebecca's face. Not resentment as I might have expected, but something closer to gratitude. "They've been..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Illuminating. I've been working with residents at Lakeside Care Center. People with no visitors, no advocates. Reading to them, writing letters for them, listening to their stories." I sipped my tea, giving her space to continue. "There's a woman there, Mrs. Abernathy, who reminds me of you. Former professor, sharp mind, incredible stories about academic politics in the 1970s. Her children moved her there after her husband died, then gradually stopped visiting. Now they only call on her birthday." Rebecca's voice tightened. "I keep thinking that could have been you if your plan hadn't worked." "Many elders aren't fortunate enough to have resources or connections," I acknowledged quietly. Rebecca set down her teacup with a soft clink. "I've been working with a therapist, trying to understand what happened, why I convinced myself that what we were doing was acceptable." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time since our confrontation. "I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. Some betrayals cut too deep. But I want you to know I'm trying to become someone different, someone better." I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of the performance I'd witnessed at Whispering Pines. The calculated tears and practiced concern. Instead, I saw genuine discomfort, the raw vulnerability of someone confronting ugly truths about themselves. "Change is difficult," I said finally. "Real change, not just the performance of remorse." "I know," she nodded. "I'm trying anyway." We sat in silence, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. There was no miraculous reconciliation, no tearful embrace to instantly heal the breach between us. Instead, there was simply acknowledgement of harm done, of consequences accepted, of the long, uncertain road toward whatever relationship might eventually be possible. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Tyler told me something that I can't stop thinking about. He said, Grandma never once expressed hatred toward us, not even when she was planning her legal case. How is that possible?" I considered her question carefully. "Hatred requires energy I couldn't afford to spare. I needed all my resources focused on reclaiming my freedom and restoring my life." I met her gaze directly. "Besides, hatred damages the vessel that contains it far more than the object it's directed toward. That's a diplomatic lesson I learned long ago. The conservation of emotional energy." A ghost of a smile touched Rebecca's lips. "Always the diplomat." "Always," I agreed. After she left, I stood at my balcony, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of amber and gold. From this vantage point, I could see both where I had been and where I might yet go. The betrayal had altered me, certainly, but it hadn't defined me. Instead, it had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed and opened doors to purpose I might never otherwise have discovered. The next morning, I began preparing materials for a cultural diplomacy class I'd agreed to teach at the community center. Life, after all, is too precious to waste on bitterness when there are still minds to engage. In my 76th year, I had learned that life's final chapters may be the most surprising, and that sometimes the most powerful position is the one others assume is powerless. My story wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration, not just of assets, but of dignity. not just of independence, but of truth. And if there was one diplomatic lesson I had finally mastered completely, it was this: your value never diminishes with age unless you surrender the negotiation to someone else. A year passed, then two. The rhythms of my new life at the Jefferson became as familiar as the diplomatic postings I had once navigated with such ease. Each day brought purpose and connection, a stark contrast to the isolation and infantilization of Whispering Pines. The Elder Dignity Project flourished beyond my initial expectations. What began as a local monitoring initiative expanded to 3 neighboring counties with a growing staff of advocates and volunteers. The project's reputation spread through elder care networks, generating calls from families seeking guidance and facilities requesting our training programs. "We've been invited to testify before the state legislature," Catherine informed me over lunch one afternoon. "They're considering a bill to strengthen guardianship oversight and facility accountability. Your experience has become something of a case study." I felt a complex mixture of emotions at this news. My personal trauma transformed into public. Policy was both validating and discomforting. "Will they need me to appear in person?" "Not necessarily," Catherine assured me, "though your presence would certainly add weight to our testimony. Your story resonates because it could happen to anyone whose family members prioritize assets over autonomy." I agreed to participate, recognizing that public speaking had been part of my diplomatic career for decades. The formal hearing took place in the state capitol, an imposing chamber where lawmakers listened intently as I recounted my experience in measured terms, emphasizing systemic failures rather than personal grievances. "The problem," I explained to the committee, "isn't just malicious individuals. It's a system designed to process people rather than protect them. When a doctor's assessment carries more weight than an elder's own testimony, when institutions restrict access to legal representation, when conflicts of interest go unexamined, we create environments where exploitation thrives." The legislation, passed with bipartisan support, establishing stricter requirements for guardianship petitions, mandatory independent medical evaluations, and regular audits of nursing facilities. Governor Carlson invited me to the private signing ceremony, thanking me for turning personal injustice into public protection. While my advocacy work expanded, my relationship with Rebecca continued its gradual, uncertain evolution. The weekly contact required by our legal agreement had initially been perfunctory and uncomfortable. But as months passed, something shifted. Her community service hours became voluntary rather than obligatory. Her conversations grew more authentic, less performative. Tyler received his acceptance to Georgetown, prompting a small celebration in my apartment. Rebecca attended, bringing a homemade cassoulet that required 8 hours of preparation, a dish I had taught her to make decades earlier after returning from a posting in France. The gesture spoke volumes. "Remember when we made this together? After you came back from Paris?" she asked as we served the fragrant stew. "I was 12, and you let me crush the garlic even though I got it everywhere. You insisted on wearing my diplomatic ID badge while we cooked," I recalled, surprised by the clarity of the memory. "You told everyone you were the junior ambassador to the kitchen." We shared a genuine laugh, perhaps the first since before. Whispering Pines. Mark remained more distant, attending family gatherings but maintaining a careful formality. His career had suffered after our confrontation, his professional reputation tarnished by rumors of elder exploitation. While I hadn't actively sought to damage his standing, consequences have a way of spreading beyond their intended targets. Kayla, now 16, blossomed as a musician, developing a particular talent for classical piano. She practiced regularly, on the grand piano in the Jefferson's community room, often drawing small audiences of appreciative residents. I recognized in her playing echoes of Robert's technique, the same distinctive phrasing, the same tenderness with Chopin. "Grandma, can I ask you something important?" she inquired one afternoon after finishing a Debussy piece. Of course. I want to apply to music conservatories next year, but Dad thinks it's impractical. He wants me to focus on business or law. Her fingers traced silent patterns on the keys. Mom says I should talk to you because you always followed your own path. I considered my response carefully. The practical path and the passionate one aren't always different. My diplomatic career began because I loved languages and cultural exchange, not because I calculated career advantages. Following your deepest interests often leads to your most meaningful contributions. That's what I think too, she smiled. Would you help me research programs? And maybe talk to Dad? This was a delicate request. Mark still maintained a certain wariness around me, understandably viewing me as someone who had upended his comfortable plans. Yet here was an opportunity to rebuild something constructive. I'd be honored to help. With your research, I told Kayla. As for your father, perhaps we could invite your parents to a recital here first. Let them see how the residents respond to your playing, how much joy music brings to people at all stages of life. The recital proved transformative. Kayla performed a challenging program of Bach, Beethoven, and several modern composers. The residents of the Jefferson attended in full force, many dressing in formal attire for the occasion. Several were former musicians themselves, offering knowledgeable appreciation. When Mark witnessed the standing ovation his daughter received, something shifted in his expression. She really is talented, isn't she? He said afterward, a father's pride momentarily outweighing other concerns. Extraordinarily so, I agreed. Just as you are with financial analysis. Different talents, equal value. Our conversation that evening wasn't lengthy, but it was civil, focused on Kayla's future rather than our past conflicts. A small step, but meaningful. Gladys continued to thrive at the Jefferson, her periods of confusion now rare enough to be noteworthy. Our weekly book club expanded to include literary debates that often lasted well into the evening, fueled by wine and passionate opinions about narrative structure and character motivation. You know what I realized recently? Gladys mused one evening as we shared tea on my balcony. If Charles hadn't stolen my money, if I hadn't ended up at that dreadful place, we never would have met. I never would have gotten out. A rather expensive friendship, I observed dryly. The best ones often are, she chuckled. But without you, I would have died in that place. Instead, I'm living again. I thought often about her words in the following weeks. How suffering can lead to connection, how injustice can spark reform, how the worst experiences sometimes open doors to unexpected purpose. The Gladys Morrison Reading Room opened at the Sea. Local library that autumn, funded by a donation I made in her name. A small plaque explained that the space was dedicated to ensuring that every voice, regardless of age, has the opportunity to be heard and valued. Gladys wept when she saw it, touching the engraved words with trembling fingers. No one has ever honored me like this, she whispered. You survived, I told her simply. Then you thrived. That deserves recognition. Samuel Rothstein continued managing my financial affairs with his customary precision, though our meetings now included discussions of philanthropic strategies rather than defensive financial maneuvers. The Swiss account, once my secret insurance, policy, now funded scholarships, advocacy initiatives, and community programs. Your father would be proud, I told him during our quarterly review meeting. He always said wealth was properly measured by its positive impact, not its accumulation. He quoted you on that? Samuel smiled. Often. As my third year at the Jefferson approached, I received an unexpected invitation to lecture at Georgetown School of Foreign Service on elder diplomacy, a term I had coined to describe the value of experienced voices in international relations. Tyler, now in his second year at the school, had apparently suggested me to his international negotiations professor. I prepared carefully for this return to academic discourse, crafting a presentation that drew parallels between international conflict resolution, and intergenerational understanding. The auditorium was filled with students and faculty when I approached the podium, Tyler beaming from the front row. "The assumption that age diminishes value," I began, "is perhaps the most persistent and dangerous diplomatic mistake in both international relations and family dynamics. We discard wisdom at precisely the moment we most need it." For 90 minutes, I spoke without notes about the principles that had guided my diplomatic career and my personal life: strategic patience, information gathering before action, recognizing leverage without exploiting it unnecessarily, and maintaining dignity even when others attempt to strip it away. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but the real reward came afterward, when students surrounded me with questions that continued until the building closed for the evening. "You've become something of a legend at the school," Tyler told me as we walked toward the car. "The diplomat who outmaneuvered her own family using the same skills she used in international crises." I laughed softly. "Hardly the legacy I expected to leave." "But an important one," he insisted. "You showed that elder rights are human rights, that aging doesn't mean surrendering your power or your voice." That night I added a final paragraph to the memoir I had been writing, not for publication, but for Tyler and Kayla to understand their heritage of resilience. The most valuable lesson from my 78 years comes not from diplomatic triumphs abroad, but from personal challenges. At home, power doesn't reside in youth, wealth, or institutional authority, but in clarity about your own worth. No one can take your dignity unless you surrender it. No one can diminish your value unless you accept their assessment. The negotiating table of life always has a place for those with patience, strategy, and the courage to assert their rightful place, regardless of age. 5 years after my escape from Whispering Pines, I celebrated my 80th birthday with a gathering that would have seemed impossible during those dark days of confinement. The Jefferson's rooftop garden had been transformed for the occasion, with strings of lights illuminating tables adorned with arrangements of my own prize roses. The guest list reflected the unexpected journey of my later years. Sophia, now the executive director of the Elder Dignity Project; Catherine Zhao, whose legal practice had evolved to focus exclusively on elder justice; Ambassador Rothstein, retired but still mentoring young diplomats; Gladys, elegant in a vintage dress she'd found at a consignment shop; and a dozen residents from the Jefferson who had become treasured friends. Tyler attended with his fiancée, Amara, a brilliant law student he'd met at Georgetown who shared his passion for international human rights. Kayla arrived directly from a recital at the conservatory where she was completing her second year, still wearing the formal black dress from her performance. Even Mark came, bringing a respectful distance but also a considerate gift: a rare book on diplomatic protocols from the Cold War era that he'd tracked down through an antiquarian dealer. Rebecca had organized the entire celebration, coordinating with the Jefferson staff, arranging for a string quartet, and personally preparing several dishes that carried special significance from our shared past. The transformation in our relationship hadn't been miraculous or instantaneous, but evolved gradually through countless small moments of honesty, accountability, and cautious reconnection. As dessert was being served, Samuel tapped his glass for attention. As Eleanor's financial advisor and friend, I have the honor of announcing a surprise. The Elder Dignity Project, which began as her personal mission, has just received a major institutional grant to expand its work nationwide. Starting next month, the project will operate in 15 states, with plans to reach all 50 within 3 years. Applause rippled through the gathering. I hadn't known about this development, having intentionally recused myself from the grant application process to avoid any appearance of personal interest. Furthermore, Samuel continued, the State Bar Association has voted to establish the Eleanor Mitchell Award for Excellence in Elder Advocacy, recognizing attorneys who demonstrate exceptional commitment to protecting the rights and dignity of older Americans. Catherine reached across the table to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright with shared pride in what we had built together. As the evening wound down, guests offered impromptu toasts, each illuminating different facets of the life I had built after Whispering Pines. Ambassador Rothstein recalled our diplomatic adventures in turbulent capitals. Sophia spoke about the hundreds of seniors whose living conditions had improved through our advocacy work. Gladys delivered a wickedly funny tribute to our friendship forged in adversity and strengthened through literature. When the formal program concluded, I found a quiet moment with Rebecca at the garden's edge, looking out over the bay where lights from distant boats glimmered on the dark water. "Thank you for this evening," I said simply. "It was perfect." "It was the least I could do," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying genuine warmth rather than the performative enthusiasm I'd once grown to distrust. "Though I had selfish motivations too." "Oh?" "I wanted to see all the lives you've touched since—" She hesitated, still finding it difficult to directly reference her betrayal. "Since everything happened, I needed to understand the ripple effects, both from what I did and from how you responded." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight on the water. "There's something I haven't told you," Rebecca said finally. "My community service at Lakeside Care Center, I'm still doing it, 3 days a week now. But it's different." "Different? How?" "I'm running a legal rights workshop for the residents, teaching them about guardianship laws, healthcare proxies, financial protections." Catherine helped develop the curriculum. Pride tinged her voice. "Last month, we helped Mrs. Abernathy, the former professor I told you about, challenge her son's control over her accounts. She won." The revelation touched me deeply. Rebecca's transformation from exploiter to advocate represented something profound, the possibility that even serious ethical breaches could eventually yield positive growth. "You found meaningful work," I observed. "I found purpose," she corrected, gently. "Through facing the worst thing I've ever done." Our conversation was interrupted by Tyler, who approached with a small, carefully wrapped package. "Sorry to intrude," he said, "but I wanted to give Grandma her gift privately." Rebecca excused herself, leaving us alone under the garden lights. Tyler handed me the package with uncharacteristic solemnity. "This isn't just from me," he explained. "It's from multiple sources." Intrigued, I unwrapped the gift to find a leather-bound volume. Opening it revealed a collection of diplomatic cables, memorandums, and field reports, all bearing my name as the authoring officer. Some dated back to my earliest posting in East Asia, others from the tense negotiations in Eastern Europe as the Soviet Union collapsed. "How did you possibly gather these?" I asked, stunned by the comprehensive nature of the collection. Many of these documents would have been classified for decades. "I had help," Tyler admitted. "My diplomatic history professor discovered your name while researching the Ankara crisis negotiations. He was surprised to find substantial policy contributions from a female diplomat in that era. When he mentioned it to me, we realized your diplomatic work has never been properly recognized." He turned the page to reveal testimonials from former colleagues, ambassadors I had served under, and even several foreign officials from countries where I had been posted. Each described negotiations I had led, insights I had provided, or crises I had helped resolve, often behind the scenes while male superiors took public credit. "The department declassified these specifically for this project," Tyler explained. "Your work shaped American foreign policy in critical regions during pivotal moments. Did you know that your framework for minority rights protections during the Balkans conflict became a template for 3 subsequent peace agreements? I hadn't known. Much of my diplomatic career had been spent in the background, crafting language, building relationships, and resolving conflicts without public recognition. To see it documented so comprehensively was profoundly moving." The final section is my favorite, Tyler said, turning to the back of the volume. "There I found letters from young female diplomats currently serving in embassies around the world. Each described how my work, recently rediscovered through Tyler's research project, had inspired their own diplomatic approaches. "You're becoming something of an icon in diplomatic history circles," Tyler grinned. "The professor is developing an entire course module on your conflict resolution techniques." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and I had returned to my apartment, I sat with the volume open on my lap, reflecting on life's unexpected trajectories. My diplomatic career, once seemingly concluded, was finding new relevance. My personal trauma had catalyzed systemic reforms. My fractured family had found a fragile but genuine path toward healing. The telephone interrupted my reverie. Answering, I was surprised to hear the governor's chief of staff, requesting my participation on a newly formed commission examining elder care regulations across the state. "Your unique perspective as both a victim of the system and an architect of its reform makes you invaluable to this effort," she explained. "The governor hopes you'll consider serving as the commission's chairperson." I accepted without hesitation, recognizing another opportunity to transform painful experience into constructive change. The following week brought another significant development. Catherine arrived at my apartment with a legal brief that represented the culmination of 2 years of quiet advocacy. "The state Supreme Court has agreed to hear Mitchell vs. Winters," she announced, referring to our test case, challenging the physician who had conducted my fraudulent competency evaluation. "If we prevail, doctors who provide deliberately misleading assessments for guardianship proceedings will face professional consequences regardless of statute of limitations on their medical licenses." "And if we lose?" I asked, always the diplomat weighing contingencies. "Then we've still established a public record of his misconduct and created awareness of the issue," Catherine replied. "But I don't intend to lose." Her confidence reminded me of myself during high-stakes negotiations in my diplomatic days, outwardly certain while privately calculating every possible outcome. Autumn brought Tyler and Amara's wedding, a joyful celebration held in Georgetown University's historic chapel. As grandmother of the groom, I was seated prominently in the front row, alongside Rebecca and Mark, whose relationship had stabilized into something resembling cordial partnership, if not passionate romance. The ceremony included a unique element that brought tears to my eyes. During the exchange of vows, Tyler and Amara included promises not only to each other, but to their future family elders, pledging respect for autonomy, appreciation for wisdom, and protection of dignity throughout all life stages. "A direct result of your influence," Rebecca whispered as we watched the young couple seal their commitment with a kiss. "And of your counterexample," I replied, without rancor. We had reached a place where such truths could be acknowledged without reopening old wounds. At the reception, I found myself seated with Ambassador Rothstein, now using a wheelchair but still commanding attention with his diplomatic anecdotes and incisive observations. "Who would have thought," he mused, gesturing toward the celebration around us, "that your most consequential negotiation would be with your own family?" "Perhaps all diplomacy is ultimately personal," I suggested. "Nations, like families, are just collections of individuals with complex needs, fears, and aspirations." He raised his champagne glass in acknowledgement. "To Eleanor Mitchell, who mastered both international and intergenerational diplomacy with equal skill." As the celebration continued around me, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the despair of Whispering Pines to this moment of multiple triumphs, professional recognition, family reconciliation, systemic reform, and personal purpose. The path had not been easy or direct. It had required strategic thinking, emotional resilience, and the courage to seek justice rather than revenge. But sitting here, surrounded by evidence of positive change, I knew with certainty that the most important diplomatic mission of my life had been successful beyond my highest expectations. The following morning, I began drafting testimony for the upcoming state Supreme Court case, carefully choosing language that would illuminate the systemic problems without descending into personal grievance. My diplomatic training served me well in this task, helping me transform individual injustice into compelling arguments for structural reform. I paused midway through a paragraph, struck by an unexpected realization. At 80, I was more engaged, more purposeful, and more influential than at any previous point in my life. The betrayal that had been intended to silence and diminish me had instead amplified my voice and expanded my impact. As I returned to my writing, I smiled at the ultimate irony. Rebecca's greatest gift to me had been the very attempt to take everything away. In trying to erase my autonomy, she had inadvertently helped me discover my most powerful self. The 10th anniversary of my liberation from Whispering Pines arrived with little fanfare. At 85, I had developed a tendency to mark time not by calendar dates, but by accomplishments and moments of significance. The Elder Dignity Project now operated in all 50 states with a staff of over 200 advocates. The Mitchell v. Winters case had established legal precedent that led to 14 states revising their guardianship laws. My diplomatic papers had been formally archived at Georgetown School of Foreign Service, where they were studied by future diplomats. These milestones mattered more than arbitrary anniversaries. Yet Tyler insisted on acknowledging this particular date, organizing a small dinner at his home with immediate family and close allies from our ongoing advocacy work. 10 years of freedom deserves recognition, he declared, raising his glass, as we gathered around his dining table. And 10 years of transformation for all of us. His 3-year-old daughter, Eleanor, named partly in my honor, sat on my lap throughout dinner, occasionally feeding me bites from her plate with the solemn concentration only toddlers can muster. Her presence represented the most hopeful outcome of our family's painful journey. A new generation being raised with explicit awareness of elder dignity and respect. "Gamma powerful," she announced to the table at large, repeating a phrase she had apparently heard often in her household. The adults laughed, but the moment carried genuine weight. The narrative of my experience had been carefully preserved and shaped for Elena's understanding, not as a family scandal to be hidden, but as a legacy of resilience to be honored. After dinner, as others cleared dishes and moved to the living room, Rebecca lingered at the table with me, her expression contemplative. "I've been offered the executive director position at the Central Coast Elder Services Coalition," she said quietly. "They want someone with both administrative experience and personal understanding of guardianship issues." "That's significant recognition of your work," I observed. Over the years, Rebecca had transformed her community service from obligatory hours to professional commitment, earning certification as an elder care advocate and eventually taking a position coordinating regional services. "I'm hesitating because of the public relations aspect," she admitted. "The position involves legislative testimony, media interviews, public speaking. I would inevitably be asked about my background in elder advocacy. And you're concerned about revealing your personal history," I surmised. She nodded. "My journey started with exploiting an elder, you. Taking a leadership position in elder protection feels somehow fraudulent, even after all these years of legitimate work." I considered her dilemma carefully. The most effective advocates often emerge from direct experience with system failures. Your understanding is comprehensive precisely because you've seen both sides. But what would I say if someone asks directly? Yes, I once had my mother declared incompetent and institutionalized for financial gain, but I've evolved. The truth has power, I said simply. Acknowledging past wrongs while demonstrating present commitment creates a compelling narrative about human capacity for change. Rebecca seemed unconvinced. The organization might withdraw the offer if they knew everything. Then perhaps they should know before you accept, I suggested. Your qualifications are legitimate. Your experience is valuable. Your transformation is real. Lead with transparency and let them decide. 2 weeks later, Rebecca called to tell me she had disclosed her full history to the board during final interviews. After intense deliberation, they had confirmed their offer, believing her unique perspective would strengthen the organization's advocacy efforts. They want me to develop a prevention program specifically addressing family financial exploitation, she explained, her voice a mixture of relief and renewed purpose. Using my insight into how and why family members rationalize such actions, this development represented something I had scarcely dared hope for during those dark days at Whispering Pines, that Rebecca would not only acknowledge her wrongdoing, but find constructive ways to prevent similar harm to others. The completion of this circle brought me profound satisfaction. The following spring, I faced a personal challenge when doctors discovered I needed heart valve surgery. The procedure itself was routine for someone my age, but the hospitalization triggered uncomfortable memories of institutional vulnerability. I found myself experiencing unexpected anxiety as admission procedures stripped away my clothing, personal items, and temporarily my autonomy. Catherine, who had become not just my attorney but a dear friend, immediately recognized my distress during a pre-surgery visit. "You're back there, aren't you?" she asked gently. "At Whispering Pines." I nodded, embarrassed by my reaction, but unable to suppress it. "Irrational, I know. This is necessary medical care, not wrongful confinement." "Not irrational at all," Catherine countered. "Trauma leaves imprints that can be reactivated by similar circumstances. Let's establish some protocols to help you maintain your sense of control." She worked with hospital administrators to create modified procedures for my care, ensuring all treatments were fully explained before administration, guaranteeing private telephone access, allowing personal clothing when medically feasible, and requiring staff to ask permission before entering my room except in emergencies. "These are accommodations any patient should receive," Catherine noted, "but they're especially important for someone with institutional trauma." The surgery proceeded smoothly, though recovery required 6 weeks of limited activity. During this period, I experienced an unexpected role reversal as Rebecca took family medical leave to assist with my care. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of needing help with daily activities, a dependency I had fought so hard to escape a decade earlier. We spent the next half hour discussing her vision for coordinated elder services, improved guardianship oversight, and enhanced protections against exploitation. Though I was flattered by her consultation, I recognized this moment as an appropriate transition from my direct involvement to mentoring the next generation of advocates. "You should speak with Catherine Zhao," I suggested. "She's been developing an integrated approach to legal services and social support that addresses many of your concerns. And my daughter Rebecca," I added after a moment's consideration. "Her perspective from both sides of the exploitation equation provides unique insight into prevention strategies." The governor seemed surprised by this last recommendation. "I'm aware of Rebecca's background," she said carefully. "Her transformation is impressive, but not everyone would suggest their former exploiter for a policy position." "The most valuable voices often come from unexpected sources," I replied. "Rebecca understands the rationalization process that enables family exploitation precisely because she experienced it from within. That knowledge is irreplaceable in designing effective interventions." After the governor departed, I found myself momentarily alone beneath the roses. The afternoon light had softened, casting a golden glow across the garden that reminded me of countless diplomatic receptions in far-flung capitals. How strange that my final and perhaps most significant diplomatic mission had taken place, not in ornate embassy ballrooms, but in a nursing home room and a lawyer's conference table. Gladys appeared beside me, moving more slowly now with the assistance of a cane, but still elegant in her vintage attire. At 93, she had surpassed all actuarial expectations for someone who had spent years in substandard institutional care. "Quite the triumph," she observed, lowering herself carefully into the chair beside me. The governor consulting you, the State Department honoring you, 3 generations of your family celebrating you. Not bad for a woman they once deemed incompetent and discardable. We've both outlived their expectations, I smiled. Spite is an excellent motivator for longevity, she quipped, eyes twinkling. Though purpose serves even better. We sat in comfortable silence, 2 survivors watching the celebration continue around us. Our friendship, forged in the institutional wasteland of whispering pines, had deepened through years of shared advocacy and mutual support. I've been thinking about Charles lately, Gladys said suddenly, referring to her son who had exploited her financially years earlier. He's made contact after all this time. Oh? I kept my tone neutral, knowing the complexity such family reconnections entailed. Terminal cancer. 6 months, perhaps less. He wants to make amends before the end. Her voice carried decades of accumulated hurt beneath its matter-of-fact surface. What are you considering? That's just it. I find myself uncertain. After all these years of righteous anger, I'm suddenly questioning whether reconciliation might bring peace for us both. She looked at me intently. What would Eleanor the diplomat advise? Not Eleanor, my friend, but Eleanor the professional, negotiator of impossible situations. I considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. Diplomacy teaches us that reconciliation requires acknowledgement of harm, appropriate reparations when possible, and concrete commitments to changed behavior. Without these elements, making amends becomes merely an exercise in relieving the wrongdoer's conscience at the victim's expense. Gladys nodded thoughtfully. So I should establish conditions for our meeting. Conditions that protect your dignity while allowing for genuine resolution, if that's what you truly want, I confirmed. The goal isn't punishment, but neither is it unconditional absolution. Always the diplomat, she smiled sadly. Even at 90. Especially at 90, I corrected gently. Age brings the perspective to distinguish between vengeance, which changes nothing, and justice, which changes everything. The celebration continued into early evening, eventually transitioning to the Jeffersons' formal dining room for a special dinner. I found myself seated between Tyler and Ambassador Rothstein, now in his late 90s and remarkably sharp despite increasing physical frailty. I've been reflecting on our parallel journeys, the ambassador remarked, both of us spending our careers in service to diplomatic ideals, only to find our most challenging negotiations waiting for us in retirement, though with vastly different stakes, I noted. Your negotiations helped prevent military conflicts. Mine merely prevented personal injustice. He shook his head firmly. Never diminish the significance of personal justice, Eleanor. Nations are merely collections of individuals. The dignity we secure for ourselves ultimately strengthens the dignity available to all. His words resonated with a truth I had come to understand gradually over these past 15 years. That personal advocacy and systemic change were not separate endeavors, but deeply interconnected processes. My individual fight for autonomy had catalyzed reforms that now protected thousands of vulnerable elders. As the evening concluded, Elena presented me with a handcrafted book titled The Diplomatic Adventures of Grandma Eleanor. Each page featured her childish illustrations of moments from my career and later advocacy work, rendered with surprising emotional accuracy despite their technical limitations. I interviewed everybody, she explained proudly. Daddy helped with the history parts, and Mommy helped with the spelling, but the pictures are all mine. I was deeply moved by this gift, this tangible evidence that my story would outlive me through Elena's understanding and interpretation. She had depicted not just my professional accomplishments, but also my confrontation with Rebecca and Mark, presented not as family scandal, but as a courageous stand for elder dignity. That night, returning to my apartment, I felt a profound sense of completion. The betrayal that had once threatened to define my final years had instead become merely one chapter in a much longer and richer narrative. The diplomatic skills I had honed across decades of international service had ultimately preserved my autonomy, restored my family relationships, and created meaningful systemic change. As I prepared for bed, I noticed a small envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a brief note from a new resident at the Jefferson, a woman recently rescued from an exploitative guardianship situation by the very legal reforms I had helped establish. Thank you for fighting not just for yourself, but for all of us. Who followed? She had written. Your courage created the path that led to my freedom. I placed the note carefully on my bedside table, a reminder that our actions create ripples we may never fully witness. What had begun as a personal struggle for dignity had expanded into a movement that continued to grow beyond my direct involvement. This, perhaps, was the most meaningful diplomatic achievement of my life, not preserving peace between nations, but building bridges of understanding and protection for vulnerable elders. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself profoundly grateful for the unexpected final chapter of my life. The betrayal that should have diminished me had instead revealed my greatest strength. The institution that should have silenced me had instead amplified my voice. The daughter who had attempted to erase my autonomy had ultimately been instrumental in its most powerful expression. In diplomatic terms, this represented the most successful negotiation possible, one where past adversaries find common purpose in building something better than either could create alone. The winter following my 90th birthday brought unexpected challenges. A severe bout of pneumonia left me temporarily weakened, requiring a brief hospitalization followed by weeks of recovery. Though I had faced far greater adversities with composure, this illness forced me to confront my mortality with new clarity. During my convalescence, Tyler and his family temporarily moved into the guest suite at the Jefferson to assist with my care. Elena established herself as my dedicated diplomatic attaché, bringing messages from visitors, organizing my medications with solemn attention to detail, and reading aloud from my favorite books when fatigue prevented me from holding them myself. "Grandma, are you going to die?" she asked one afternoon, her directness reflecting the honesty with which her parents had always addressed important matters. "Eventually, yes," I replied with equal frankness, "though not immediately if my doctors are correct." She considered this answer with grave seriousness. "I need more time with you. There are too many diplomat lessons I haven't learned yet." "What lessons do you think are most important?" I asked, curious about her perception of my legacy. She didn't hesitate. "How to be powerful even when people think you're not. How to win without hurting people. How to make bad people change into better people." Her simple articulation captured the essence of what I had tried to demonstrate throughout my life, particularly in its final chapters. The conversation prompted me to consider what meaningful tasks remained unfinished as I approached the inevitable conclusion of my journey. After regaining sufficient strength, I contacted Catherine Zhao to discuss formalizing my final arrangements and updating my legal documents. Though I had established comprehensive plans years earlier, recent developments required adjustments. "I want to create a more structured legacy program," I explained during our meeting. "Something that extends beyond the existing projects and scholarships. Catherine, now in her 60s but still sharp as ever, immediately grasped my intention. "You're thinking about how your approach to elder advocacy continues after you're gone." Precisely. The Elder Dignity Project has institutionalized many of our practical initiatives, but the philosophical foundation needs explicit articulation. Together, we designed the Eleanor Mitchell Fellowship for Diplomatic Approaches to Elder Justice, to be housed at Georgetown's School of Foreign Service with satellite programs at law schools across the country. The curriculum would integrate my diplomatic expertise with elder advocacy principles, training future professionals to approach elder justice as a specialized form of negotiation and conflict resolution. The core insight, I explained as we drafted the program documents, is that elder autonomy requires the same diplomatic skills as international relations: strategic patience, leverage assessment, coalition building, and face-saving solutions that allow all parties to maintain dignity. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. You've always approached elder advocacy as a diplomatic mission rather than a legal battle, even when legal tools were necessary. Because the goal isn't winning against family members, but creating sustainable solutions that protect elders while preserving relationship possibilities whenever feasible. This nuanced approach had defined my work for 15 years, distinguishing it from more confrontational advocacy models. While I recognized the necessity of legal action in many cases, I had consistently sought resolutions that addressed underlying family dynamics rather than merely punishing exploitation. With my professional legacy secured through these formal arrangements, I turned my attention to more personal matters. Despite our reconciliation, certain subjects remained largely unaddressed between Rebecca and me. Emotional territories we had cautiously navigated around during our careful rebuilding of trust. On a clear spring morning, I invited her to join me for a private lunch on my apartment balcony. The roses were beginning their seasonal display, providing a living reminder of continuity and renewal. I've been reviewing my journals from the Whispering Pines period, I began after we had settled with our meal. For historical documentation purposes. Rebecca tensed slightly, her discomfort with direct references to that time still evident despite years of growth. I see. Is there something specific you discovered? Yes, though perhaps not what you might expect. I sipped my tea, gathering thoughts I had carefully considered. I found that even in my darkest moments there, I never questioned whether I loved you. I questioned whether you loved me, certainly. But my love for you remained constant, even as I planned my counter-strategy. Her eyes filled with tears, not the performative emotion I had once distrusted, but genuine feeling. I don't understand how that was possible. Because love and trust are separate capacities, I explained. I could love you completely while recognizing I could not trust you at all. That distinction allowed me to seek justice without vindictiveness. Did you ever hate me during that time? She asked quietly. No. Hatred would have consumed energy I needed for liberation. I felt profound disappointment, deep sadness, and righteous anger, but never hatred. I hated myself afterward, she admitted. For years. Sometimes still do, when I remember how calculated it all was. How I convinced myself it was for your own good while knowing better. This confession opened a door we had left closed throughout our cautious reconciliation. For the next several hours, we engaged in the most honest conversation we had shared since the confrontation in Samuel's office 15 years earlier. Rebecca finally articulated the complex pressures and rationalizations that had led to her exploitation attempt. Financial stress, materialistic values, genuine concern for my safety twisted by self-interest, and a culture that devalued aging. None of these explained or excused her actions, as she readily acknowledged, but understanding the context helped complete our long healing process. The irony, she reflected as our conversation drew to a close, is that your response to what I did ultimately made me a better person than I ever would have been otherwise. Your dignity in the face of betrayal taught me more than a lifetime of conventional ethics ever could. Transformation rarely comes without catalysts, I observed, sometimes painful ones. When she left that evening, something fundamental had shifted between us. Not forgiveness, that had been gradually extended years earlier, but a deeper reconciliation that acknowledged the full reality of our shared history without allowing it to define our present relationship. The following month, Kayla arrived for an extended visit between her international concert tours. Now an acclaimed pianist with performances at the world's premier venues, she had developed an unexpected specialty in musical diplomacy, collaborating with artists across political and cultural divides to create innovative peace-building performances. The State Department has asked me to develop a cultural exchange program with 3 countries currently experiencing diplomatic tensions, she explained excitedly, using collaborative musical composition as a vehicle for dialogue. Your grandfather would have loved that approach, I told her. He always believed culture could build bridges when formal diplomacy reached impasses. Kayla had brought recordings of her recent performances, including a piece she had composed titled Sunrise Variations, inspired by my Operation Sunrise counter-strategy against Rebecca years earlier. It moves from confinement to liberation, she explained as we listened together in my living room. From strategic patience to triumphant resolution. The composition was extraordinarily beautiful, complex yet accessible, technically demanding, yet emotionally direct. As the final movement reached its resolution, I found myself deeply moved by this artistic transformation of my personal struggle into universal themes of resilience and dignity. You've created something transcendent from something painful, I told her when the music concluded. The ultimate form of reconciliation. That's what you taught us all, she replied. How to transform difficult experiences into meaningful contributions. Summer brought an invitation to address the incoming class at Georgetown's School of Foreign Service, where the Eleanor Mitchell Fellowship would welcome its first cohort that fall. Though my health remained somewhat fragile following the winter's illness, I was determined to fulfill this commitment. Tyler accompanied me to campus on a brilliant September morning, where excited students filled the historic Gaston Hall. At 91, I no longer maintained the imposing physical presence that had once served me well in diplomatic negotiations, but decades of commanding attention in embassy ballrooms and international conferences had taught me to project authority through voice and bearing rather than stature. Distinguished faculty, honored guests, and especially new students, I began. You are entering a profession that requires extraordinary patience, strategic thinking, and the capacity to find common ground across profound differences. These same skills are essential in another vital arena that few of you have likely considered: the protection of elder dignity and autonomy. For the next hour, I shared insights from both my diplomatic career and elder advocacy work, weaving together case studies that illustrated their common principles. The students' engaged responses confirmed my long-held belief that elder justice deserved recognition as a specialized diplomatic discipline requiring similar expertise and strategic sophistication. Afterward, a reception allowed students to ask questions and share their perspectives. I was particularly moved by several older students who had entered the School of Foreign Service as second careers, bringing life experience that enhanced their diplomatic potential. You've opened an entirely new career possibility I hadn't considered, one woman in her 50s told me earnestly. Elder diplomacy combines my interest in negotiation with my concern for how we treat aging populations. As Tyler and I departed campus, I felt a profound sense of completion. The diplomatic skills I had honed across decades of international service had found new application in elder advocacy, and now this integrated approach would continue through future generations of practitioners. Are you tired, Grandma? Tyler asked as we drove back to the Jefferson. Physically, yes, I admitted, but intellectually invigorated. That evening, sitting on my balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of my later years. The betrayal that had threatened to erase my autonomy had instead catalyzed my most significant contributions. The nursing home, that was intended to silence me, had ultimately amplified my voice through the reforms it inspired. Most remarkably, the family relationships shattered by exploitation had been painstakingly rebuilt, not through denial or artificial forgiveness, but through honest acknowledgement, genuine accountability, and shared commitment to constructive change. The diplomat in me recognized this as the most successful negotiation of my career, transforming crisis into opportunity, conflict into collaboration, and personal trauma into systemic improvement. The mother and grandmother in me treasured the healing that had occurred across the following morning, I began drafting what would become my final public address, to be delivered at the inaugural symposium of the Eleanor Mitchell Fellowship Program 3 months later. The speech would distill essential lessons from my dual careers in diplomacy and elder advocacy, providing a framework for those who would continue this work after my direct involvement ended. Elder diplomacy, I wrote, requires us to recognize that autonomy and vulnerability often coexist, particularly in later life. The diplomatic challenge lies not in choosing between protection and independence, but in negotiating solutions that honor both needs simultaneously. As I continued writing, I felt a sense of profound gratitude for the unexpected final chapter of my life. At 91, I had found greater purpose and impact than at any previous stage of my journey. The very crisis that should have diminished me had instead revealed my most essential strength, the capacity to transform adversity into meaningful change. The betrayal that began this story had long since lost its power to define me. What remained was the legacy it had inadvertently made possible, a legacy of diplomatic approaches to elder dignity that would continue protecting vulnerable seniors long after I was gone. From my balcony, I could see new rosebuds forming on plants I had cultivated for years. Some would bloom during my lifetime, others would flower after I had departed. Their continuous cycle of renewal reminded me of life's most fundamental truth. What matters is not how long we remain, but what we nurture while we are here. In diplomatic terms, my mission was nearly complete. I had negotiated the most challenging treaty of my career, an agreement that balanced justice with restoration, accountability with possibility, and personal dignity with systemic reform. Though imperfect, as all human arrangements must be, it represented the best of diplomatic principles applied to life's most intimate territories. Elena would arrive soon for our weekly French lesson, eager to continue the diplomatic education she valued so highly. I would teach her not just vocabulary and grammar, but the deeper language of strategic patience, ethical leverage, and reconciliation without compromise of principles, lessons drawn from both international conference tables and family confrontations. This transfer of knowledge across generations represented my final and perhaps most meaningful diplomatic posting, ambassador to my own family's future, ensuring that hard-won wisdom would not be lost, but rather continuously renewed and reapplied to emerging challenges. In the twilight of a life spent building bridges across profound divides, I had discovered that the most essential diplomatic skill is neither tactical cleverness nor strategic brilliance, but the fundamental recognition of dignity in ourselves and others, a recognition that becomes not less, but more crucial as we age. This insight would be my lasting contribution, that elder dignity requires the same sophisticated diplomatic approach as international relations, and that protecting autonomy in life's final chapters deserves our highest diplomatic skills and most principled negotiations. As the sun set on my balcony, illuminating the roses with golden light, I felt the profound peace of a diplomat whose final mission had achieved its essential purpose, not through force or manipulation, but through the patient application of principle to the most challenging negotiation of all, the negotiation for continued human dignity in the face of time's inevitable advancement. 5 years after my address, at Georgetown, I celebrated my 96th birthday quietly in my apartment at the Jefferson. My public appearances had gradually diminished as physical strength waned, though my mind remained clear and engaged. The Eleanor Mitchell Fellowship had expanded to 12 universities nationwide, training a new generation of advocates in diplomatic approaches to elder justice. On this milestone day, my family gathered around me. Tyler and Amara with 13-year-old Elena and her younger brother Robert, Kayla between concert tours, Rebecca and Mark, their relationship with me now characterized by a hard-won authenticity, that time had only deepened. The dining table was arranged with elegant simplicity, adorned with roses from my garden and the fine china I had collected during diplomatic postings decades earlier. As we finished our meal, Elena presented me with a leather-bound journal. "We've been collecting stories," she explained, "from everyone whose life changed because of you." Inside were handwritten accounts from dozens of people, former Whispering, Pines residents liberated through reforms I had helped establish, law students whose career paths shifted after encountering my work, family members who had reconsidered their approach to aging relatives, and diplomatic officers who had incorporated elder dignity principles into international human rights frameworks. "Your ripples keep spreading, Grandma," Elena said, her expression reflecting wisdom beyond her years. "Your diplomatic mission never really ends." As twilight settled over the bay visible from my windows, I found myself filled with profound contentment. The story that had begun with betrayal and confinement had transformed over 2 decades into something I could never have imagined during those dark days at Whispering Pines. A legacy of dignity, resilience, and systemic change that would continue long after I was gone. The greatest diplomatic achievement, I told my gathered family, isn't in preventing conflicts that might have happened, but in transforming those that did happen into opportunities for greater understanding. The evening concluded with Kayla playing a new composition on the Jefferson's grand piano, a piece that began with dissonance and constraint before evolving into harmonious resolution. As the final notes lingered in the air, I recognized in its structure the journey of my later years. From exploitation to advocacy, from betrayal to reconciliation, from vulnerability to renewed purpose. 3 weeks later, I passed peacefully, in my sleep, the journal of impact stories on my bedside table and a vase of fresh-cut roses from my garden scenting the room with their fragrance. The diplomatic mission of my life was complete, though its effects would continue unfolding through the lives I had touched and the reforms I had helped create. My memorial service, held in Georgetown University's chapel, brought together diplomats and elder advocates, family members, and former adversaries, united in recognition that my greatest contribution had been to demonstrate how diplomatic principles could transform personal crisis into lasting social change. The Eleanor Mitchell approach to elder dignity became established protocol in guardianship proceedings across the country. The principles I had articulated, strategic patience, ethical leverage, dignity-centered solutions, were incorporated into training for judges, attorneys, healthcare providers, and families navigating elder care decisions. On what would have been my 100th birthday, Eleanor Mitchell, now a law student specializing in elder justice, stood before the incoming class at Georgetown School of Foreign Service, continuing the tradition I had established years earlier. My grandmother taught me that the most important diplomatic skill isn't clever strategy or tactical advantage, she told the assembled students. It's the recognition that dignity is non-negotiable at every age and in every circumstance. She concluded with words I had often shared with her during our French lessons and diplomatic discussions. Your value never diminishes with age unless you surrender the negotiation to someone else. This principle, which had guided my response to betrayal and shaped my approach to advocacy, would continue protecting vulnerable elders long after my story had become a chapter in history. The enduring legacy of a diplomat whose final and most consequential mission began not in a foreign embassy, but in a nursing home room where dignity refused to be diminished. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.